So, today we're not really here to talk about a car. We're here to talk about a business decision that was forged in a moment of pure crisis. This isn't about horsepower or nostalgia. Not at all. It's about the AMC Gremlin as a really fascinating case study in why some successes are just built to expire. So, let's dig in and understand why this automotive punchline was actually a masterclass in short-term strategy. You've probably heard the jokes, right? For decades, this car has been held up as a prime example of terrible design, a total misfire from a company that was already struggling. The common wisdom is that it was simply a mistake. But what if that's completely the wrong way to look at it? Here's the thing, and this is really the whole point of our deep dive today. The Gremlin wasn't a mistake, not even close. It was actually the right answer to a very specific set of questions the market was asking at a very specific time. And understanding that context, well, that's the key to the entire story.
To really get the Gremlin, you have to understand the sheer panic that created it. This wasn't a normal time for car buyers. This was a market completely gripped by a deep economic anxiety.
Think about the perfect storm facing the average American consumer back then. The oil crisis meant you had no idea what you'd be paying for gas next week. Suddenly, that big, comfortable sedan in the driveway wasn't a symbol of success anymore. It was a financial time bomb. Then you add in soaring insurance premiums, runaway inflation eating into your paycheck. People really felt trapped. And look, this wasn't just some vague feeling people had. The numbers were real, and they were scary. You can see right here just how sharply fuel prices and inflation shot up. This chart shows the very real, very tangible financial pressure that was building on families all across the country. The stability people had gotten used to was just vanishing. And this is the key. You have to understand this massive shift in how people thought. They weren't walking into a showroom thinking, what's the coolest or the fastest car I can get? No, they were asking themselves, what is the single safest financial choice I can make right now? What won't bankrupt me if gas prices double again? The Gremlin wasn't born from desire, it was born from fear. Okay, so we've got the market demand down. It's all about fear and financial safety. But now we have to look at the other side of the equation. What was American Motors Corporation actually capable of building? The Gremlin wasn't just a product of the market, it was a product of AMC's own very real limitations. So what was in AMC's toolbox? Well, they had a few things going for them. They had an existing compact car platform, the Hornet, and simple engines that were cheap and reliable. This meant they could build something new on a shoestring budget and get it out the door fast. But what were they missing? Pretty much everything else. They had no real capital for a clean sheet design, no long-term R&D budget to speak of, and not enough brand prestige to sell a car on the name alone. So what's the recipe when you're in a bind like that? It's pretty simple, really. You take the platform you already have. You literally chop a big chunk out of the middle. You drop in an engine you've been building for years, and you absolutely rush it into production. There was no time and certainly no money for years of careful fine-tuning. This was basically automotive first aid. You know, when you look at that quirky, kind of awkward shape of the Gremlin, you're not seeing a design flaw. You're not seeing a lack of imagination. You are literally looking at a picture of AMC's bank account. The car looked the way it did because it was the only car they could afford to build at that specific moment. And you know what? It actually worked. The Gremlin sold surprisingly well for a few years. But this is where the story gets really interesting, because baked into that early success were the seeds of its own destruction. Its victory was, by its very nature, incredibly fragile. So let's break it down. Why did people actually walk into a dealership and buy one? Well, look at the reasons. It was almost all about anxiety and financial security. People saw it as a safe bet in an unsafe time. They bought it because it was American, and it just seemed like a good deal. But notice what you don't see on this chart. Things like amazing engineering, beautiful styling, or built to last. Its sales were based entirely on temporary feelings, not on deep, lasting product loyalty. And this, right here, this brings us to a really important idea. Let's call it hidden fragility. This is what happens when you build something that is just perfect for one really unstable moment. Its biggest strength, how well it fits the crisis, is also its greatest weakness. Because crises, by definition, always end. The market was absolutely guaranteed to change. And the problem was, AMC had no plan for when that change happened. None. There was no plan for a second-generation Gremlin. There was no money set aside to evolve the platform or give it any serious upgrades. The car was a dead end, plain and simple. It couldn't be improved to compete on quality, and it couldn't be repositioned to something else. It was stuck. So, what happens next is almost inevitable, right? As the market starts to calm down, as the shock of the oil crisis begins to wear off, the Gremlin's entire reason for existing just starts to evaporate. Its decline wasn't really a failure, it was a predictable expiration. Look at this timeline. It lays it all out, crystal clear. The oil crisis hits in '73, and boom, Gremlin sales peak the very next year. But just a few years later, as the market stabilizes and people start to feel a little more confident, the car's sales just fall off a cliff. It becomes irrelevant not because the car itself got any worse, but because the world it was built for just disappeared. So if you put AMC's strategy side by side with its rivals, you see this really stark difference. AMC basically went all in on one big, short-term bet that the crisis would last forever. Their competitors, on the other hand, were playing a longer game. They were focused on gradually improving their cars, building their brands on things like quality, and using platforms that could be updated for the future. You could say AMC won the battle of 1974, but they were pretty much guaranteed to lose the war of the decade. So, you see, it's not really fair to say the Gremlin failed. A better way to put it is that its job was done. Its purpose, its entire value proposition just expired. The moment buyers were no longer ruled by fear, a car that was just a safe financial choice simply wasn't enough anymore. So what are the big takeaways here? What can we learn from this little moment in history? The story of the Gremlin isn't just about a weird-looking car. It actually offers some pretty timeless lessons. First lesson, and it's a big one, products that are born out of a crisis, they almost never age well. They're so perfectly designed for a moment of anxiety that the second that anxiety fades, they just look compromised and out of date. Lesson 2 is a bit more subtle, but so important. There is a huge difference between being popular for a moment and building a truly sustainable product. Just because you're selling a lot of something today doesn't mean you have a foundation for tomorrow, especially if today's sales are being driven by fear. And the last lesson is all about trust. You know, all those compromises AMC had to make, you could see them. They were right there in the weird proportions, the cheap interior. People put up with it when they felt they had to. But in the long run, when customers can see the compromises, it tells them you're not giving them your best, and that just chips away at brand trust over time. So, in the end, it all comes back to this one idea. The AMC Gremlin wasn't a mistake, it was a moment. It was the perfect, pragmatic, deeply compromised solution for a brief, panicked period in history. And the ultimate lesson it teaches us is that moments, by their very definition, never last.